Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Samantha Stanley from the Media Education Lab, and I'm so excited to explore with you today a topic that I, for one, have not given much thought to until recently. And I know that there are several friends in the room, but please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you are, because I think we're covering the coasts and hopefully some European coasts as well. So today we're actually kicking off a three-part series of discussions that will help us understand how governments understand and value media literacy education. So to do that, the Media Education Lab has partnered with the Center for Media Literacy to bring in experts at the intersections of media literacy and global relations, national security, and public diplomacy. So if you're like me, you have so many questions about this work and what it is. So we've designed this series to be a space where we can come together, not just to learn, but to participate in collaborative inquiry about our existing knowledge and opinions and figure out what it is that we'd like to know. So today's session is going to be led by a woman who hardly needs an introduction, but she is in some stylish shades. So Tessa Jolls. So for those of you meeting Tessa for the first time today, Tessa is the president and CEO of the Center for Media Literacy, and she's really done it all when it comes to media literacy initiatives, from research to publication to training. Tessa is a longstanding staple in the media literacy community, and she's joining us today from Brussels, where she is working on a Fulbright project, the details of which she'll share with us today. So without further ado, Tessa, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Samantha. Well, I am really delighted to be here, and you can call me the spy who came in from the cold in Brussels today with my shades, but basically I'm covering a black eye that I got in a fall, and I'm doing well, I'm fine, but I didn't want to start Halloween early, so I thought I'd go ahead and put these shades on. So we'll get started. I have a presentation that I thought would guide us through and help us with our discussion. And so let me find that, and then we'll take it from there. All right. Well, we are gathered today to talk about media literacy as a strategic defense strategy. And just as Sam was saying in her introduction, this is a new topic to a lot of people. We haven't really thought about media literacy in this particular way or for this particular kind of application. And just to give you a little background information, I was awarded a Fulbright NATO Security Studies Award. I actually won it in 2019, but because of other circumstances and certainly COVID, it turned out that my Fulbright assignment was postponed until this September, and it will go through the end of December of this year. So I basically have several months to investigate this particular topic. And I also am appointed as a visiting scholar at UC Louvain here in Louvain, La Neuve here. And so it's really exciting kind of opportunity because I'm connected with the academic world, which of course is very important in this research process. And at the same time, I am connected with NATO because they have a very serious interest in media literacy. And even though these awards for cultural diplomacy are awarded in different areas, media literacy is one of the most important areas that they're looking at right now. And so they're really pleased that I'm pursuing this. Now, I want to also give you a little background information into what I'm actually studying. And so let's take a look at that. The topic of my project is called Building Resiliency, Media Literacy as a Strategic Defense Strategy. And I am interviewing policymakers, NATO officials, and many members of the media literacy community because my goal is to give a snapshot of the ecosystem that exists for media literacy. so that we can better connect the grassroots with the policymakers, because we all know that media literacy has long been supported at the grassroots level, which of course, to me, is a very, very important aspect of the media literacy movement, because when you look at history, it's the grassroots movements that are the most successful, the most sustainable, and the ones that are the most deeply embedded in culture as time goes by. And I think we can look at some examples in recent times. For example, the tobacco campaigns really changed the culture's attitude toward tobacco and toward smoking. And so we've seen a huge cultural shift in terms of tobacco use. Environmental issues are another example, and we're still continuing to see the evolution of this movement, but definitely it's on the plate of every policymaker. And so we know that we as citizens can have a huge influence from the grassroots, and the media literacy movement has grown up through the grassroots, I would say, for at least the last 50 years, and with a few exceptions, even earlier. So, so we definitely have a lot to contribute to the conversation. And that's exactly what my job is, to help represent that conversation to these policymakers and to NATO, so that they have a better idea of what the grassroots is saying about media literacy, and especially the people who have been involved in it and who have actually advocated for it for so many years. Okay, now, so again, I'm connecting the grassroots with the policymakers. And of course, there's really a real emphasis on strategic defense. And so today, I really want to get your feedback on that, and we'll get to a point where we'll do that. Now, again, these are some of the goals: to provide a snapshot of the media literacy ecosystem. I also want to provide in my report a case for foundational media literacy. Many of you know, and I've talked to many colleagues who feel that in this particular information environment, oftentimes media literacy is compressed into just the idea that media literacy is all about disinformation and misinformation and the ability to discern. But we all know that media literacy is broader than that. It also involves media production, it involves participation in social media. It really looks at any topic, any subject, anywhere, anytime. And that's the skill level that we want to encourage for media literacy practitioners, and also for citizens. Now, at the same time, I want to make some recommendations for action that we feel are necessary to promote and sustain media literacy systemically. If you're like me, I'm sure you've been involved in many projects where when the grant funding ends, the project ends. And we really want to go beyond that. We want to really find ways to systematize media literacy and institutionalize it so that it is ingrained in the practices of people every day, and really becomes part of the cultural sand, you might say, just part of us that is totally prolific and understood by many people. Now, NATO has actually been interested particularly in misinformation and disinformation for quite a number of years. And of course, propaganda is, a major concern of defense organizations. So NATO established the Strategic Communication Center of Excellence in Riga, Latvia in 2014. And the work they do is fascinating. I highly recommend you're going to their website and looking at the kind of studies that they're doing, because to me, media literacy has two major thrusts. One thrust is around technical and technology types of subjects, where we're looking at what's the newest technology and how does it impact our audience. And this Strategic Communication Center is on top of that, and they really do a lot of research around those kinds of topics. And then the other thrust for media literacy, which of course is very major when you look at having 1 billion people to educate, is around education and how media literacy fits in education, how it can best be delivered, and then of course having research around that so that we have evidence-based practices in media literacy that we know are effective. And so the Strategic Center for Excellence does some work in training, and they also have done some evaluation work in that arena. So they're very active, and so I think that it's definitely an organization that we all should be aware of in the media literacy community. Now, we mentioned in the promotion for this particular session that I also would talk about the EU. And I must say that in terms of formal policy, I believe that the EU has been sensitive to media literacy for many years. And they have an EU panel of experts on media literacy. And they really consider this group a priority. Many of them come not from education, they come from the regulatory bodies. In other words, the country's equivalent of the FCC in the United States. And again, that's something very important for us all to recognize, because they are coming at media literacy more from the technology side, more from the impact on the audience side rather than the education side. And again, we need to be very cognizant of that and very conscious of how media literacy is being advanced at the policy level. Now, I think a great thing, though, is that in the EU, media literacy is actually codified as the words that are used, and also countries are required as members of the EU to give reports on what they're doing for media literacy. And so these reports are a way of actually checking up and making sure that there's some action. So I think those are some of the most significant factors to be aware of with the EU. And of course, we could dig in and really get into a lot more, but we don't have the time for that today. But we do not have anything equivalent in the United States that I know of that is fostered by our government for the US population. However, I will tell you that the US embassies have been doing work in media literacy, and the State Department also has been. So there's a lot of interest, and yet it's at this point seems to be pretty confined to more around diplomacy and defense. Now, here's the big problem. We all know that through the internet, content is plentiful, but the process skills of media literacy are scarce. And why? Because they're not being taught. So on the education side of media literacy, we have a huge gap. And so the education systems are really structured, even now, to center on content transmission rather than on teaching process skills. And so we really need to enable that ability to access, analyze, evaluate create, and participate with media content. The Center for Media Literacy did a survey last summer about parental attitudes toward media literacy in California. And it was very interesting because when we used the words media literacy, people really didn't understand what it was, and there wasn't much awareness of media literacy. But when we use these descriptions of process skills, the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and participate with media content, parents were very eager for their children to have these skills. And so again, we have a huge education job to do, but the appetite is there on the part of the parents, certainly. And I know that the Media Education Lab just did a study in Rhode Island along the same lines, and they found that, again, there just wasn't much education around media literacy in primary grades or even later. So again, huge gap there. Now, we know that these skills of media literacy are lifelong learning skills. And basically, our goal is to teach citizens to learn to learn. And this empowers citizens. And so that's a very important point when we look at things through the NATO lens for strategic defense. If you get a chance to look at this report, I found it fascinating. It's called the NATO 2030 report. And there, NATO really puts out in public what it sees as its challenges, its goals. And so basically, we are looking at a significantly changing world, and NATO is very cognizant of that in terms of their own mission and values. So the values continue in terms of democratic principles, and that includes rule of law, it includes transparency, it includes the division of powers. Now, we know that there are some NATO members who are becoming more authoritarian. And that, of course, is a major challenge for NATO because the members basically all agreed to follow these principles. And until now, they are really looking at the values, and they're looking at kind of reevaluating how they interact and engage with their members so that these values are honored. Now, the other thing is that when we think of warfare, NATO really defines that in terms of what they call human security. And when you think about it, it's kind of a veiled term, and yet at the same time, I think it gets at the bottom a lot more of what is going on today. Because we know that the environment has changed totally. It's not so much about boots on the ground as it might be about drones or about a propaganda attack or a disinformation attack. So we really have to broaden the way we look at warfare today. And NATO is acknowledging that. And so their principles of deferring conflict, defending borders and defending member states, and providing for security in the midst of all of these new challenges is really an absolutely huge factor in how they're looking at their plans, and also why media literacy is coming into the picture. So just to give some examples, now we have cyber attacks, we have terrorism, we have disinformation campaigns, we have recruiting online for jihadists, we have social media campaigns, technological superiority kinds of races between, for example, China and the US on 5G technology. We have climate change, and we have immigration, which, as we all know, is an absolutely huge issue here in Europe, especially. So, but also in the United States. So I don't want to diminish the importance there. So again, we've got a changing picture and we have to respond. Now, let's look at how NATO defines resilience, or how they look at resilience, because resilience is the big idea under which media literacy comes from the NATO perspective. So a resilient population is a population that's able to adapt. It's a population that's going to be able to survive through some terrible challenges, of all kinds. And so resilience is a very important attribute for all populations. And this is why Thomas Jefferson emphasized the need for an educated population for having a successful democracy. Without education, there's really hardly any way forward. So resilience can be looked at from a social perspective. How do people get along? What are the kind of cultural considerations? And from discussions I've had with NATO, they really want to see media literacy as part of the culture, and as I mentioned earlier, something that we all deal with and have inside of us every day. And then there are democratic considerations. How democratic is the country? What's going on politically? The climate, we certainly know about the challenges there. The defense spectrum, there's a wide array of defense technologies today. And again, it's changing all the time, from really warlike kinds of technologies that we see in movies and everything sometimes, but also getting into combating disinformation and finding ways to really help people be more resilient. There's critical infrastructure. Is the country able to have the roads, the bridges, all of the abilities to have transportation? And now we're seeing what happens when that particular infrastructure is interrupted, because we see the supply chains really affecting whether we can get products or what the prices are. There's economic resilience. How do we deal with depressions? How do we deal with recessions? How are we able to come back from these episodes that we know are going to happen? And then finally, and I think very interestingly, space. And NATO is really looking at that as another dimension of resiliency. So as I mentioned earlier, NATO in its 2030 report, media literacy is seen as part of what makes citizenry more resilient. Resiliency among citizens is seen as a way to engage more ably in providing for human security. Human security is seen as the prime aim of defense. So that's what it's all about. All right, let's talk about it. There's lots to talk about with this subject, and I'd like to ask you, do you believe media literacy is essential to strategic defense and human security? Do you see citizens as the first line of defense? So, what do you think, Sam? Should we break into groups, or should we just have a discussion?
Gosh, there's 36 of us, so it's quite a big group. I'm going to say, unless anybody else has a preference, let's try breakout rooms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. And how long will people have? I think I allowed for about 10 minutes, so is that a time that typically would be enough, or is it too much?
I think so, yeah. So I will put us into, let's see, groups of 3 to 4, and yeah, we'll take about 10 minutes, and I'll give you like a 2-minute warning.
Okay, that sounds perfect. And then we'll have a brief discussion. Thank you.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. Everyone's been, oh, it should be about 14 seconds left until everybody's forced to come back. Such a handy but terrible little mechanism that Zoom has there.
Oh, Tessa, you cut us off just at the best part. Oh, damn. Whoa, that was heartbreaking.
So that was me, not Tessa. Sorry.
I hear you. We were having a wonderful discussion and really, getting into some tough issues, and it was wonderful. So great. Okay, well, let's hear from everyone. And maybe we can start with my group, since I know the people involved. It was Natasha Casey and Jessica. I'm sorry, I forgot your last name. Jessica is from EDC and has a really interesting project. So can we hear from you, please?
Sure. I'm not trying to dominate, just that we were talking about the fact that our nonprofit just got funded by the Department of Defense to do this kind of weird project that's a combination of civics, media literacy, and workforce and career readiness. And so it's an interesting mix. And from my standpoint, it's interesting because it tackles sort of the systems that are involved behind civic empowerment, including media literacy. And it also is kind of trying to work backwards to build skills in younger students. And Natasha had some really interesting insights on the role of systems versus individuals trying to, practice media literacy or gain media literacy, and what are the systems they're working within. So that's a short version.
Yes, thank you. That's what we need. Natasha, did you want to talk about that idea of systems quickly here?
Okay, just real quickly. I think, this is a long-standing issue, right, in media literacy, what we can do individually versus what systemic changes need to happen, and just the conflict in that. Yeah, in a nutshell. Yeah, ongoing. And actually the systemic issues are really tough. We're still working real hard on that. Okay, Renee, how about your group?
We had a great conversation. I'm going to throw it to Jose. Jose talked a little bit about inequalities between regional inequalities, and we talked about inequalities in general being a concern. Jose, you want to talk about that point that you made?
No, yeah, it was. Sorry for the noise. I'm in a coffee shop, but no, it was that when you were saying that I found. In a volunteer I made in Italy, inequality between the South and the North in the access to this subject, media literacy. And I'm a little bit afraid that some schools and some parts of the countries will not be in the same position and take seriously. So, and Renee said that she, in her town, has this problem with schools that are really close. So I think it has an effort that everyone has to get in it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Iglika, you talked a little bit about your anxieties about media literacy being narrowed down to this defensive protectionism, but you did talk about it in relation to sort of the political realities right now, especially rising levels of Euroscepticism. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And this narrowing is problematic, especially for some countries with low levels of media literacy and no traditions in media education, but actually is the entrance to the topic of media literacy, understanding the necessity and the importance of media literacy. I also made this comment regarding the European Union approach to disinformation as a whole that started 6 years ago, and it was channeled especially to Russia as a measure against the Kremlin propaganda and Kremlin disinformation into the European Union and interference into our democratic societies and processes. But it was shifted after Brexit, mainly after Brexit and the elections into the United States. This year, 2016, is seen in the European Union. It's a pivotal one. So we are right. It's important, this cooperation between NATO and European Union into the policy level, into the cooperation level between member states, it's super important. So
yeah, I thought that idea is so maybe she made us wonder, maybe the narrowing, if it brings about cooperation, has some possible benefit. But I wanted to, in my comments, I wanted to problematize this tension between the political and the economic systems at work. It seemed to me quite ironic, Tessa, when you talked about how, what the definition of the goal is human security, what the definition of human security is, and isn't that a great goal? But then I thought, well, but you know what, from a business point of view, fear is a great commodity, and fear is being exploited moment by moment, minute by minute, in order to compel people to click and like and share. And that's going on in journalism, that's going on in entertainment. It turns out that fear is very, very exploitable. So ironically, while the political goal might be human security, from an economic point of view, we have giant industries whose business model relies on exploiting fear, and what to do about that tension.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That is key right there, which is another reason why it's not about misinformation or the content. It's about the audience and really focusing on the citizens and, how they're processing. Yep. Thank you. Okay, who else? Someone?
I'm sorry. I'll jump in. Just we only had a group of two.
That's fine.
Georgetta and I, and I think one thing that we kind of concluded was that, part of the question was whether it's critical, whether media literacy is critical to concepts of defense, of human safety. And I just thought that, the word critical is kind of a pivotal word, because it both, emphasizes the importance, that it is so important, but it is also, at base, kind of the key word. And I was saying that my background is actually in what began as cinema television studies at the University of Southern California. So, and I eventually got my PhD in critical studies. So not production, I've done that kind of stuff, but the concept of critical studies and the idea of critical thinking and the idea of being critical, being able to make those distinctions. I think, at base, that's a lot of what we're talking about here. And you talk about the audience and you say, how do you instill that level of evaluation and awareness, awareness of what is happening. Georgette also mentioned that her work and her nonprofit from the Netherlands is focused on work in Africa, I think in Rwanda, and countries like that, where media is actually radio. And so, the discussion of as somebody just brought up, equity and the consideration of, when we're talking about media, it means different things in different parts of the world. So it's such a large question, I think, that you talked about. I think our answer was yes, it is critical. Cut to the chase. Right. But anyway, good discussion.
Thank you. Yeah. And, I think this whole idea of critical is essential, because what happens when people are critical in the sense of saying, hey, I don't agree with what you're doing. And does that mean that, people will, the powers that be shut things down, So what's the tolerance for real critical? And I think that also is something that should be part of the discussion. Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, who else? Please. How many groups do we have, Sam? Do you know offhand?
Yeah, we had, I think, about 7 or 8.
Oh,
Tessa, you just cold call who has ever got their camera on.
Oh, Tessa, I can just say that we, Pat and Prasant, his microphone wasn't working, but we started talking about the NSARS protests in Nigeria, where Pat is from. And so that is all about the media and how very desperately it's needed there, because this is leading to physical violence and has been for at least a year.
Yes. So how is the media used as a tool to incite violence? And there are examples of that. I think some of them are called the radio wars.
And some closer to home, I mean, January 6th. So
yeah, exactly. You're right. Okay, so let's see, who else do we have here? My problem is I have the wrong glasses for reading. Okay, let's see, I see a Maria. Maria, would you like to share?
Maybe Marta.
Oh, Marta, yes, okay. Again, sorry for that vision. Oh dear.
This has been such a great webinar. My position is very critical. You know, I live in a place where we hardly have media literacy per se in the full, you know, context and everything. And well, in our group, what I said was that in terms of economics, I agree very much with what Renee had to say, because what I said in my group was about diplomacy and economic, the things that mostly interest us, because we get so many lies from everywhere, more during the pandemic. And all those lies involve the fears also. So they are always stepping on us and we're fighting back. And that hardly gets discussed in school. I mean, it's like a no-no. It's prohibited. It's a taboo. And so we have to do it in small groups. And we have an research journalism center, which is a group of journalists that are the only ones that are really doing the job here to decipher media and break it down and inform about misinformation and disinformation. But in terms of security, it is, I think this, you brought this topic, and this, I mean, I get goosebumps because all these lies, they provoke so many human conduct that and there's always manifestations constantly about everything. I mean, we hardly have electricity here on a whole day, you know. I think we are famous because of that. But all that are strategies to keep us, you know, in a cocoon constantly, you know. If it's not because of educations and the earthquakes, we hardly have schools up, you know. I mean, it's very critical. So for security, it is imperative that we develop these topics more in education. I mean, it's like, it's an SOS that I think we need it badly. So, and for security issues as well. And I think diplomacy in diplomacy, I think diplomats should have a master in media literacy. My mother was a diplomat here. So, I mean, they know how to manipulate everything. So I think we should get a diplomat to come and speak about
yes.
But it's been great, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Oh, you're so welcome, and thank you for your contribution here. Also, Marta, what country are you from? I didn't pick that up.
Well, we are a U.S. territory.
Okay, all right.
Which speaks very much to the complicated political tensions that this inevitably draws out, Marta. And that, I think, is something we can underline for the Americans in the room here. So, yeah.
Yeah, talk about inequity and and also a lack of knowledge, you know. I mean, who would know? That doesn't get covered. And, you know, as you said, a lot of that information is suppressed or it's manipulated, and, you know, here we are. Okay, anybody want to volunteer, or will I need to squint here to see somebody else?
Prasant has put something in the chat, and Prasant, I don't know if you can unmute and you want to share, but I'm happy to read the chat as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read it. So Prasant says, fake news, hate speech, and misinformation inside Facebook's challenges. Okay, I think this is okay, Facebook's relationship with India is complicated. And so Prasant is basically calling out the issues that Facebook as a service is prompting in India with anti-Muslim materials. Lots of rumors, a really familiar story, right? Like in a lot of countries. So COVID misinformation, religious disinformation, and things like that. So yeah, something going on in India as well.
Yeah, so Tessa, inevitably then this issue about regulation is part of what has to be how we think of strategic. If enhancing security is important, then it brings us to this question of what to do about these unregulated giant media companies whose platforms are the vehicle for spreading hate, and are individuals accountable for the fact that we're incentivized to hate as part of the way these platforms are built.
Absolutely. And at the same time, what kind of regulatory framework should there be? One of the issues that I've been very interested in is personal property rights around our personal data, because the companies talk about privacy. They don't talk about ownership of our data. We should own our data. We should be paid for the monetization of our data by these platforms. And if we had personal property rights defined and respected, like a Magna Carta for the internet, well, then we would have a base for having a more rational legal framework around it. Right now, we don't have a rational framework, and yet personal property rights are rooted in our law for centuries. And so I believe that those rights are first and foremost in terms of turning some of this around and really looking at it. So anyway, that's my personal opinion, but I think that Renee's point is right on in terms of the monetization of fear and hate. And it's being done with our data, with our personal data. Okay, any other shares before we wind up? It's amazing how fast the time has gone. I've just been fascinated by the discussion. So I really welcome hearing from you. My email, I'm going to put in the chat so that you've got it. And you can find me easily online. But please do let me know if you would like to contribute any information, ideas, organizations, really whatever's on your mind, because I am very open. And at this point, my whole job, oops, sorry about that. My whole job is really to make sure that I'm trying to represent what's going on in our community. So I have my email here, and please do be in touch. I'm just really honored to be able to do this project and bring the concerns of the media literacy community to hopefully some people who may be able to actually do something. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tessa. And also, I want to remind everyone that this is just part one of a three-part discussion. And obviously, there's a lot to dig into here. And so the hosts of our next two talks are here with us today. So next time we'll be meeting on November 8th, and we'll hear from Monica Hanley, who's going to focus a little bit more on national security. And then on November 29th, Michelle Johnson, who's also here, is going to talk a little bit more about public diplomacy. So same registration link. If you've registered today, and you have, because you're here, you have the link for next time. So Thank you again so much, Tessa. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we'll see everybody on November 8th. Happy
All
Media
right.
Week.
Thanks,
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
That was
Thank
great.
you.
See you
Thanks,
soon.
Tessa.
Thank you.